Ladies and gentlemen, apologies for the short delay. We are waiting for the arrival of the Minister, but we should get underway in a few minutes. Thank you for your patience. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to this Scientific Advice Mechanism Conference 2025, where our theme for our discussions this afternoon and tomorrow is Building Bridges, Shaping Europe's Science for Policy Landscape. A very warm welcome to those of you here with us in the room and also to those who are watching via live web streaming. My name is Jackie Davis. I will be your Master of Ceremonies and moderator of the plenary sessions in this wonderful, amazing room. There is a social media hashtag we would like to encourage you to use if you want to set out that message about science for policy, and we really do encourage you to do so. You can use the hashtag. It's on your screen, Science Advice. If you want to ask questions, there will be two ways of doing this. If you are in the room, you can either raise your hands in the old-fashioned way and I will come amongst you with a microphone, or you can go into Slido and we'll show a Slido QR code from time to time. You can scan it and write your questions if you prefer. That will be later on in our more interactive sessions, not in our opening speeches. If you're online, obviously the only way to do it will be via the Slido code. My only request is please be brief, not small essays. Nice, short, sharp questions or indeed comments that I can see at a glance and relay them to our panels. The Wi-Fi network, if you haven't found it already, is OEAW-guest, the username event 3728, that's 3728, and the password is very complicated, capital V, capital N, 47, $ZFG. There are little signs around. Hopefully, you'll be able to find them. If you haven't logged in, log in. Anyway, let us get underway. The Minister is joining us very shortly. But to start with, we are going to hear from our hosts in this amazing building. Heinz Fassmann, who is president of the Austrian Academy of Sciences, couldn't be with us this afternoon, as he will explain, but he did send us a video message. So let's hear what he has to say.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, as president of the Austrian Academy of Sciences, I would like to warmly welcome you to our institution. Unfortunately, due to a trip to Mongolia with our federal president, I'm unable to be with you in person, which I very much regret. However, I'm delighted about your interest and participation in the conference Building Bridges, Shaping Europe's Science for Policy Landscapes, which is taking place in Vienna for the first time. As you may know, I spent almost 4 years in politics as federal minister. I gained a good insight into the mechanism of politics. The time was intense, but it was also very interesting. The years 2020 and 2021 were particularly challenging because the coronavirus impacted and sometimes even brought life to a standstill. At that time, the federal government was faced with the situation of having to take measures and fight a virus we knew very little about. Politicians needed advice, and we needed it urgently. Gradually, we received answers from various scientific disciplines, and we were able to form a picture of how the virus spread, how dangerous it was, and which effects the so-called non-pharmaceutical measures had. Science advice was extremely important, and we received specific information. For example, how vulnerable young and old people are, people who are overweight or have a compromised immune system, people in rural areas or in cities, and much more. Politicians' work was not taken away from them, but it was made easier. In the end, politicians still had to decide whether to take more risk, but possibly more deaths, or the other way around. Politicians always have to decide between conflicting goals, but science can show us the consequences of these different options. Since my time as minister, I have been interested in the mechanism of scientific policy advice. How far should science go with its recommendations? What can a politician expect from a scientist and a scientist from a politician? What is an ideal scientific advice mechanism? I therefore supported the discussion with the German National Academy of Sciences, Leopoldina, which led to the Vienna thesis, a collection of 9 principles for a successful policy advice mechanism. I have also systematically surveyed the scientific advisory structure and landscape in Austria. From time to time, an academy president is also allowed to conduct research. The situation in Austria is complex, and there are many advisory structures, particularly in areas where the gap between scientific knowledge and the knowledge available to politics is especially large. For example, economic policy is complex and the achievable goals are contradictory. In such a situation, sound advice from excellent economics is highly welcome. The same applies to the health sector when it comes to questions about the approval of vaccines, the control of epidemics, or the use of genetic engineering. Politicians like to rely on scientifically sound advisory bodies. Whether they always make decisions based on science or according to other criteria is another matter. Science can help politics, but politicians must support science advice mechanism by providing a good legal framework and sufficient financial resources. That is part of the deal. You will be discussing these topics as well as scientific diplomacy, an important approach to comprehensive foreign and security policy. So I would like to thank everyone who helped make this conference possible and wish you interesting panels, sessions and discussions.
So, Heinz, Fassmann there, ladies and gentlemen, underlining why this conference, the topics we are discussing, are so important, and some of those key issues we will be delving into. How far, he said, should science go with its recommendations? What can politicians expect from scientists? And indeed, what can scientists expect from politicians? And he also talked about what is an ideal scientific advice mechanism. We'll be looking into how to build the capacity, build those structures and landscapes for a science for policy environment. And he said, science can help policy, but politicians must support them. We will delve into all of these issues in our discussions. Now we're going to hear from the European Commissioner for Startups, Research and Innovation, Ekaterina Zaharieva, who again, unfortunately could not be with us, but very much wanted to address you. So she too sent us a video message. So let's hear what she has to say.
Dear Minister Holzleitner, members of the Academy, advisors, dear colleagues, welcome to European Commission Scientific Advice Mechanism Conference hosted by the Austrian Academy of Science. Your discussion on shaping Europe's science for policy landscape is timely and essential. Science is a fundamental pillar of decision-making. For us, better understand problems and identify effective solutions. To respond efficiently to crises like COVID-19, to engage in long-term strategic planning, such as the Clean Industrial Deal, to strengthen European global competitiveness. Science is foundation for responsible, democratic, and forward-looking policymaking, which is why we must design systems that incorporate scientific evidence. Yet, the role of science in policy and society is often challenged. Unfortunately, we are witnessing this across the ocean, with the erosion of research freedom, funding cuts, and growing pressure on scientists to align with political narratives. The US is retreating from key global science policy bodies such as the World Health Organization and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Among these challenges, Europe must maintain its global leadership as the place where scientific research is supported, where the free critical thinking is protected, and scientific expertise and evidence are allowed to play their role in informing our common decisions. Europe has a unique opportunity to lead in science advice to policy, in science diplomacy, in ethical research, and collaborative and open approaches to knowledge. President Ursula von der Leyen made this crystal clear when she recently announced the Choose Europe for Science initiative with a €500 million package to attract top scientific talent. Last week, I met my fellow R&I ministers in Competitiveness Council to reaffirm this ambition. And I'm happy to say that it is not just the Commission that wants to choose Europe for science. All member states are developing initiatives to attract researchers to our continent. We have adopted the ERA Policy Agenda 2025-2027, where strengthening science for policy is one of the key actions for the next 3 years. We also propose to include the freedom of scientific research in a new ERA Act. I invite all of us, scientists, policymakers, advisors, to keep building bridges between disciplines, institutions, and countries, and between science and policy. Thank you all, and special thanks to our Austrian host.
So the European Commissioner there, and she talked about that issue of the role of science being challenged, often being challenged. We're going to talk about that difficult global context and what it means, and how do we ensure that science foreign policy is resilient, the structures are resilient, in our first panel when we talk about the interaction with politics and society. Just to briefly outline the programme for you for this afternoon and tomorrow, we're going to be focusing, as I say, first on that key issue of the interaction between science advice, politics and society. We're going to talk about designing better science for policy institutions. What should they look like? How do we build on the work that's been done? You will remember, those of you who read council conclusions, ministerial conclusions from the EU, that emphasis on fostering a science for policy ecosystem, and it outlined some of the things that you need to do in order to achieve that. We're going to talk about that later on in some of our sessions, and we're also going to talk about, crucially, building the skills, building the practices for those who work at the science policy interface. What skills do you need? What support do you need? What incentives? And we're also particularly looking at those early in their career or mid-career. What sort of incentives do they need to engage with science advice in this contested and difficult area? And we're going to do this through plenary sessions, and then later on some breakout sessions where we will delve into much more detail of some of the challenges and hear about some of the approaches that really do work. And all of this will culminate in what we're calling tomorrow a fishbowl session. And in that session, this is a session for all of you. We have the wonderful Petra, who is over here capturing everything you say. I caught her by surprise, capturing what you say in graphic form. And she will kick off our fishbowl session by showing us what she has produced, but do take a look from time to time. And then we'll have a discussion with all of you about what came out from the parallel sessions and how you see the way forward. And I will be coming amongst you and do encourage you to get involved. But I am delighted to welcome onto the stage now Eva-Maria Holzleitner, who is the Minister for Women, Science and Research here in Austria, to deliver the keynote address and inspire our discussions. Minister, I know you have a hectic schedule today. We are delighted to see you. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear professors, dear excellencies, dear science advisors, researchers, policymakers, dear distinguished guests. It is a pleasure and an honor for me to welcome you all at this high-level conference organized by the European Commission Scientific Advice Mechanism on shaping the future science and policy landscape at the Austrian Academy of Science, here in Vienna. Ladies and gentlemen, the current geopolitical framework conditions are challenging for liberal societies and for science and policy in general. Not only are our democracies under threat, but also the entire scientific enterprises. Recent developments against democracy, plurality of opinions, as well as freedom of expression and scientific freedom, also in the Western world, demonstrate how fragile the relationship between science, policy, and public really is. The values shared by science and democracy are anti-totalitarian and both thrive in an atmosphere of openness and criticism. In times where science is inherently global effort, we should take joint action for safeguarding these values and this heritage. You all know that science for policy and evidence-informed policymaking is an important cornerstone of the future European research area. In view of the fact that Austria will take measures to strengthen its national science for policy ecosystem, this conference comes at a crucial time. I do not have to make point before this distinguished audience that in current times and in this challenging political climate, scientific advice is needed more than ever. The complexities of our social changes are such as policy making requires the best available science. We know for sure, as proven, for example, by the OECD Trust Survey, that scientific evidence is a stabilizing factor for society and economy. The OECD and the European Commission Joint Research Centre identified the lack of best evidence as the main driver for low trust in decision-making. So the main purpose of bringing science into policy is to create better policies for better societies. A better use of science will help improve public trust in governments and ultimately strengthen our democracy. The European Commission has, with SAM, established a best practice example in science, advertising, politics and policy because of a clear process. As a consequence of the COVID pandemic, several member states have started individually reform their national S4P ecosystem. And in my role as Federal Women's Science and Research Minister, I strongly support evidence-informed policy making across government. Let me elaborate on a few points in the next couple of minutes. I separate them into some more general points of observation and then in those that can be addressed at the level of a science ministry. And finally, I will make some points regarding in a way forward in the context of the S4P in Austria. Improving the cross-cutting integration of knowledge in public policies across all sectors and levels of governance is a difficult but needed endeavor. However, it requires a prerequisite, the establishment of a common understanding about goals, needs and changes required for the S4P ecosystem in member states. Of course, certain policy decisions can be taken without science. Therefore, the case for informing policy through evidence needs to be made more explicitly by those who support in a way that resonates with the values of citizens, not only of fellow scientists. This will ultimately increase also the demand for scientific evidence of political decision makers. We should recall that scientists and policymakers define problems differently. One as something to solve technically, based on scientific methods, the other as much more social process of negotiating solutions that have a majority of support. In a vibrant democracy, we need to be aware and also allow for these interests of various nature to meet, to combine, and to fusion in some ways. Some are personal interests, values, and convictions of the scientists. Some come from policymakers, while others from lobbyists, stakeholders, or, for example, from institutions. Different national governance systems influence policymaking, cultures and practices, not only in countries, but also across policy fields. Institutional and discursive conventions differ and define what counts as evidence. The point I want to make is that there are many obstacles to integrate scientific evidence into policy making, and a lot of common ground and understanding still needs to be developed. I hope that connections between EIPM-related initiatives across Europe will follow for and enable peer review and mutual learning activities, as well as exchanges of best practices in terms of how they could be translated from one ecosystem to another. The role of my ministry plays in advancing the science policy interface is not one, but are many parallel roles. We are funders, policymakers, promoters, and users of research at the same time. The role of the research ministry in this context is the concentration on the production of knowledge at the beginning of the chain. This means measures to increase the S4P readiness in science by increasing capacity and competence, By promoting science in general, we indirectly contribute to science literacy, to perceptions of science in society, to a culture of reflection and engagement from kindergarten to university and throughout adult life. This is key to create the need for science for policy in a society. Science journalism is also an important driver in this field. Without strong science base and excellent science available, scientific advice for policy will most probably not be up to standard. In order for it to work, a strong and well-funded science system should be in place. We are negotiating on that in Austria at the moment, to be honest. In other words, it may not be possible to have an excellent science for policy ecosystem without a robust and productive wider science system strongly based on scientific freedom. My ministry will also support interdisciplinarity and the integration of social sciences and humanities in research that address social changes. These disciplines can help to weigh and integrate complex cross-domain perspectives and viewpoints, including those of non-academic actors such as policymakers, companies, NGOs, consumers, users, or citizens. This type of problem-oriented research is addressing policy-relevant questions. In Austria, based on the OECD review of innovation policy for Austria in 2018, an evaluation of the Austrian innovation ecosystem, 3 advisory councils for science and research policy have been merged into one single council for science, research, and innovation, thereby reducing redundancies and gaining strength and effectiveness in advice. This new council was established in 2023 with the mission to advise the federal government on the policy areas of research, science, innovation, and technology development. It is such example of advisory council that takes a holistic perspective on the Austrian research and innovation system. And this council has a very good homepage, and today we presented a landscape of the Austrian research and development area in Austria. So I welcome you to look onto this homepage because it's very informative. My ministry, together with this newly created council, is addressing its national S4P ecosystem within its future area national action plan by developing strategies and fostering actions. The Austrian government program includes the aim for sectoral ministries' administrative data to be opened up for research use by 1st of July 2027 based on a legal act. And this is necessary. This is really necessary because research needs data. In 2022, the Austrian Microdata Center, AMDC, at the Statistics Austria was set up with support of my ministry, and this center should be developed and further improved over the coming years. My ministry will promote the use of administrative data in commissioned research projects and studies by ministries in all policy fields. All these activities are important contributions to evidence-informed policymaking in Austria. Several projects look at gender aspects, and this is also very important for me because my ministry, as said here, for women's science and research of the Austrian labor market, so several projects we're looking on, for example, at the Austrian labor market and economy, projects like parental leave and career trajectories of men and women in Austria or women in the foreign trade sector in Austria help us to develop better policies for women in all different fields. What will be fostered as well under this ERA initiative is an overall culture of research and policy engagement and a learning culture across all domains. Several actors will join efforts and work towards a common S4P ecosystem in Austria. Line ministries and public administration, parliaments, scientific institutions, as well as science advisory councils. In a couple of years, I would like to see that science and research become a cross-departmental government affair. Science can enable government to identify what it does not yet know and need to know and should need to know. Ladies and gentlemen, let me close by saying that I hope you will have rich and fruitful discussions at this conference during the next 2 days that will bring you and us collectively forward in our endeavor to shape the future of European S4P. Enjoy your stay in Vienna, and thank you for your invitation, and I'm sorry that I was a little bit late.
Thank you very much indeed, Minister. Thank you so much. And I know you can't stay with us long, but we really do appreciate you being with us here today. And you started by saying that science advice is needed now more than ever. You highlighted some of the obstacles, but you also suggested there is a way. We should not despair. There are many things we can do, and we're going to hear about some of the things that are being done to overcome those obstacles and things that really work. And you talked about how Austria is meeting that challenge. So you've given us a lot of food for thought. Thank you very much, and we will come back on all these topics in our discussions. And we're going to start those discussions straight away with our first panel on scientific advice interacting with politics and society. Let me introduce our speakers, and as I introduce your speakers, please do come and join me. Barbara Weitgruber, who is Director General of the Scientific Research and International Relations Directorate in the Austrian Federal Ministry of Women's Science and Research. Come and sit next to me, Barbara. Nebojša Nakičenović, outgoing chair of the Group of Chief Scientific Advisors to the European Commission. From henceforth, he has given me permission to call him Naki. So, very warm welcome to you, Naki. Stefan Constantinescu, chair of the Science Advice for Policy by European Academies, better known to all of us as SAPEA board. Very warm welcome, Stefan, to you too. Niels Erik Salin, who is from the European Group on Ethics in Science and New Technologies. And when we talk about science advice, we are, of course, always also talking about ethics advice. So great to have you with us. And last but not least, Joanna Drake, Deputy Director General in the Directorate General for Research and Innovation in the European Commission. Joanna, lovely to see you. Thank you for being here. Just a reminder, if you want to ask questions, we'll show that I already see some have come in, and we'll show the QR code from time to time. And I'll try, we're running a little late, and I don't want to steal your coffee break, so I'll try and squeeze in a couple of raised hands later, if I can do so. So let us jump straight in. And Barbara, I mean, we heard there from the Minister about, yes, some of the obstacles, but also ways of achieving them. And I want to just start, and somebody in the audience jumped straight in with a question saying, how can we build on the success of SAM, of the scientific advice mechanism, to expand and strengthen science for policy advice? I want to talk about the solutions later, but in terms for you, among the challenges the Minister spoke about, what would you identify as most important?
Well, thank you. Thank you also for already coming up with questions from the audience. I think that's very important. I think as the president of the Academy also said in his introduction, it's the expectation management is very important. And a clear definition of the roles of the individual sectors in the ecosystem. The politicians, the scientists and researchers, public administration, and civil society. And I think the examples we all were witnessing during the pandemic was a mix of the roles and different expectations. Also from the side of researchers, expecting that the advice they gave would be taken up one-to-one by politics, and also sometimes politicians not actually doing their job, but saying, well, this is the advice I got, and that's what I'm doing, and I'm not accountable. And that's, I think, the most important is that we have a joint basis and an understanding of whose role is which in this ecosystem, and clear guidelines in order to have a very good joint start. Where's the problem? And then a common understanding on how to actually manage.
And that's very interesting, because we often focus on when politicians don't take the advice, but you're highlighting another issue where they do, but use it, if you like, to absolve responsibility. And that links, I think, to the question of public trust then in what's being done. I'd love to come back on that. Nagi, someone in the audience, and I don't know whether you planted this question, because he said to me beforehand he wanted to talk about the successes of SAM. So did you write that question? No. In terms of the success so far, how you see it, and what do you see as the challenges, particularly in this, the Commissioner referred to it, the Minister referred to it, in this very challenging context we find ourselves. What are the challenges ahead?
Well, thank you very much for that question. Let me just first say it's wonderful to be in this gorgeous hall. I always enjoyed here many meetings that Academy and IASA have organized, so it's fantastic. And this is a very special occasion for me, but I'll come to that in a second. Let me try to answer your question, respond to your question first. I mean, I think as the Minister said and others, the world is facing a confluence of interrelated challenges and problems. That's the problem. They're interrelated. They're not independent. They cannot be solved in silos, in my view. At the same time, I think, arguably, trust in science is eroding. And so, as the Minister said, we need science more than ever, science advice in particular, because I think solutions will require monumental effort. So that's one first point. The big challenge, I think, for all of us, I think in particular in Western Europe, in Europe in general, is what is happening across the Atlantic. I think that needs to be spelled out. I mean, the academic freedom is being attacked in many ways, scientific advice itself. I think many universities are already suffering. I think what's really deplorable is what's happening with Harvard University. And I don't know whether you have followed that. U.S. National Academy. Elon Musk with Dodge has cut the budget of the U.S. National Academy. Seriously, there is an interesting blog of Marsha McNutt, the president, on the website that is, I think, I recommend to everybody to read what the consequences of that would be. So that's on that side. And let me just say on that, maybe also a personal comment. I was a foreign student in U.S., and I can say, that was great for me, but I hope also one of the reasons why I had close contact with the U.S. scientific community. So I think these are the challenges, but there are also good news, if I may do that. Yeah.
Well, indeed, and the Commissioner spoke about this being an opportunity for Europe to lead in science advice. I love always in conversations not to just focus about challenges, but also seizing opportunities. I hope we can come back on that. But Stefan, in terms of where we are and how you see the challenge ahead to build on the successes there have been, what for you, where does the focus need to be, do you think?
So where we are is that Europe managed to do something very serious and coherent and recurrent, which is in 2016 established this scientific advice mechanism with 100 academies representing sciences, medicine, engineering, all the European academies and Academia Europea. And this is a stable structure. It's not an ad hoc structure. It gives advice in a recurrent way, and it gives the advice that the most qualified people in the field consider to be certain, because science has now made some discoveries and established truths which will be here with us in a million years. So based on this certain information, we can give advice, and that is the evidence. The problem is that science hasn't solved all the problems, and because we have problems that are not solved, people think that even the ones science solved are not solved to the end. And there is a huge challenge in educating the public and the political world to discriminate between what we know for sure, and there is no question about it, and what we don't know, and do not mix between them. Now, with respect to the United States, I think that in the United States there was a tradition that the National Academies of Engineering, Sciences and Medicine gave advice, but it's not structured as coherently as in Europe. So we have a chance now to lead, and one thing we're going to do, and we have already done, is invite high-level experts from United States academies that are also part of our European academies to be part of working groups of evidence research reports and the working fabric of our reports that are at the basis of the recommendations that the group of chief scientific advisors are eventually formulating. Now, it's not only the United States. France, where Louis Pasteur, introduced the rabies vaccine years 10 years ago, they started this vaccine hesitancy. So we are having problems in Europe, not only in the United States. Things that were clearly established. Everybody knew they were good. We eradicated polio. And now we're talking about not vaccinating children for anything anymore. So clearly, I think the main problem is science literacy, is the fact that in primary schools, in high schools, we do not cultivate science transmission by competent people, and therefore people go to mainly business and other things, and they do not really evaluate information and do not discriminate truth from fraud.
So one of the key issues now is that compelling narrative, not just to policymakers for why the advice you are giving, why they should heed it and why it's important, but also linking that to the public discourse.
And this has impact in politics itself.
Exactly.
Because if people come and promise to people undeliverable goals based on scientific evidence and they are voted for, they will come to power and they will discourage science effort because science will contradict their political program.
I want to ask how we can make sure science advice, the structures are resilient in the face of all this a little bit later. But Niels Erik, and particularly now focusing on the ethical side of this, and this challenging political climate also raises ethical questions. How do you see the challenge for you now and for the other ethics advisors in this room?
I don't know. I don't think there are any new challenges or new problems. I think we can approach the problems as we always done. And but what is important is that ethics is an integral part of policy making. And when I was invited to this session, I was very pleased and felt honored. And then I looked, I couldn't find the word ethics anywhere. And then suddenly it was added. And that happens one time too many. I think ethics is extremely important to have present to begin with. And one of the reasons is, of course, that the decisions that the politicians are going to take, or the recommendations that the policymakers are going to do, they can never be done without values, and they need ethics. So what has happened within the work we have done for the Commission is that we have joined forces. Joint forces is saying too much, but we have some interaction with Naki's group, and that has proved very effective and efficient. A friend of mine says that, and I'm paraphrasing him, but today, that the role of science and ethics advice is not agreement, but better and fewer disagreements. And that, of course, is what we can do together, Naki and I and our colleagues.
Thank you very much. Joanna, complete the picture for us in terms of the challenge and also, though, that opportunity that the Commissioner spoke about for Europe to really lead in this area. How do you see that balance, if you like, of challenge and opportunity?
Well, when you're challenged, you always come out stronger. If you build on that challenge, if you, first of all, embrace it, define it, but also carve out the opportunity and work on it and build on it. And I think this is exactly the point where we're at. It's not that Europe does not have a culture of science advice and informing of policy making. It's that now that it is being challenged, and let's face it, it is, and thank you, Nagi, for making it so clear. You made my job easier. It's there, we acknowledge it, but we also then have to do something about it, and we are. But we need to make it a lot more visible, a lot more coherent, a lot more robust, a lot more standing up for what we are and who we are. And I think this is the opportunity for Europe to do that. And we already have a series of policy advice mechanisms that have been working within the European Commission. They have already been mentioned. They are actually very well represented even on this panel. But I'm really glad that, Austria has taken these measures that the Minister has just outlined for us. And although there are other member states who have been building on science advice and timely science advice, but not only on peer learning, but also on capacity building, on the trust element and on the communication element. And I really want to really, really emphasize this. We're not just living in a geopolitical difficult situation. We're also living in a situation where we are getting a lot of fake news, a lot of news that is actually a lot of algorithms working against us, working against science and the facts of science, working against the proper advice. And this is why what Stefan mentioned about vaccination, a lot of that is out there, and people, just either swallow it in, or because they are not well informed, or because they want to remain in that area. So there is a lot that we have to work against. So what we really need to work on, and this is real opportunity here, is that we need to be more robust. We need to navigate all this politicization. We need to rebuild the trust. Let's face it, science also suffers from mistrust. Why? Because maybe the tradition of scientists, and I don't want to be killed here on this platform, but maybe, scientists know how to use the language between themselves that they understand, but we also need to really go out there today and fight those algorithms, fight that fake news and fake information. And I think we really need to have, as the minister said, there's only an informed cabinet of ministers and politicians, but really and truly having already communicated with the public who is also well informed.
Thank you very much. And indeed, you're talking about the member state level. We're talking about the European level, brilliantly represented here, and great to have Austria also on our panel. There are already some questions about the national level coming in about should national governments be persuaded to develop their own science for policy strategies with clear action plans? Should they indeed set up their own SAMs? And this, of course, all links back to those council conclusions of December 2023, which said we need to foster this science for policy ecosystem. We're going to hear later on this afternoon what the Commission is doing to try to help deliver on that and support member states through mutual learning exercises and so on. Come back on all of that. But I want to come back really to the question of why, somebody in the audience has already asked, what makes building those bridges that we talk about in the title of this event between policymakers and experts so difficult? I mean, why, Joanna, do you think, is your sense when you look across the whole landscape that science advice is more welcome in some countries than others, is better received, that the relationship works better in some than others, and can we learn from that? I'm just wondering what you think the differences are in perception and what we can learn. Same question to you all.
Absolutely. I think this was actually acknowledged in the report as well that was published in 2022 by the staff working document, where it was acknowledged very clearly that there is fragmentation in the way that the culture, so-called culture of science advice, has actually been treated and built up along the member states. And I think when we talk about opportunity, this is right now the opportunity to really correct that, to really work on that, not being fragmented anymore. We need to have the strength of coherence and coordination. But we need to invest, and the investment, it's not only about investing more and more in research. Of course, we need to continue doing that. And this is why, the Choose Europe campaign that has started also, and the action started in the Commission, is 500 million, in order to attract talent from abroad, is also a good one. But it's not only that, it's more a question of culture, of really ingraining also in the political class and also in citizens that they need to be informed, so there is a responsibility. We need to build the capacity, we need to have the skills, we need to invest in much more interaction between the different member states, and we need to, yes, engage in much more mutual learning exercises and peer reviews as well. So I think, the complexity of the topics as well that we are facing, it's not just a question of who is the expert or the group of experts dealing with climate or with a particular technology or with infectious diseases or with the One Health policy, for instance, which of course requires you to not only be an expert on health but also on so many other areas of our being. It's a question of bringing these things together, and it's not just a question of putting heads together in a room one day or over a seminar. This is really building a culture over time.
Niels Erik, in terms of what makes building these bridges difficult, and the Minister spoke about this a little bit, and also President Fassmann talked about expectations, understanding each other's expectations. Do you think, is that at the crux of what makes it difficult, that these two worlds don't really still understand each other properly? What for you is the challenge here?
That's probably one of the problems, and as Joanna is saying, I think we need to meet more frequently to discuss. And my experience from Sweden, I've been on advisory committees for many, many years, is that it is very important that scientists and ethicists are working together. And but there is one more group that I think is very important to get into this collaboration, and that is the politicians. So in Sweden we have a very strange, a very, very good National Committee on Medical Ethics. It consists of scientists, ethicists and politicians. And when I first was invited 20 years ago, I thought I will stay a month because I will not stand the politicians. But I realized that this was something which was really important. It builds respect when you go through the problems that you are discussing. They can bring them back to their political party, and they can bring it back to the parliament. And let me just finish. And what is... You interrupted me, so I forgot what I was going to say.
Sorry, I do apologise. You just made... You brought me a thought into my head. I apologise. We'll come back on it in a minute. Naki, you wanted to jump in?
Yes, I wanted to comment on this, because if it were easy, I think everybody will be doing it. It is very difficult, because we have disciplines in science, we have departments in policy. One can argue that politicians don't always understand science, but it's also the other way around. The scientists don't understand the politics. So doing this bridge is a real huge challenge. And I think one of the important elements is that we all have to try to express things in simple terms. I mean, controversies are essential for scientific progress, but I think for communication, I think we also we shouldn't shy from them, but we need to also express clearly where the consensus is for the policy. And if I may, since we didn't talk about that, the reason why I said this is a very special event, I think SAM and EGE are building these bridges toward policy and are very important. And Stefan mentioned that. This is important because SAM is exactly 10 years old right now. It was organized in May 2015, and it's exceedingly unique. I cannot stress that more, to be honest, because we have three components. One are the group of 7 scientists, and I would like to recognize Naomi Elmers, who is here. She will be staying on the next year of the scientific advisor. Then there is a SAPEA group of academies, and we independently of each other. Yeah. We work closely, but we work independently. And also we work closely with the EGE. So I just wanted to mention that since I'm rotating off, my mandate stopped 10 days ago, and it has been really rewarding 5 years.
But we're still making you work.
Let me just mention one thing. In these 10 years, SAM has produced 20 evidence review reports by SAPEA, which are kind of mini assessments like IPCC, and the group of chief scientifics, 20 policy recommendations on the wide-ranging topics. So I don't know whether that's appropriate model for all of the member countries, probably not, but I think it is a model that works, and I think needs to be strengthened, needs to be nurtured like nature, like science itself.
We'll come back on how to strengthen it, but Stefan, you wanted to come in, and then Joanna wants to jump in.
Just to say
and then Barbara, come to you.
That the system of advice that Nagy was mentioning also has the scientific advice mechanism unit of the European Commission, which works very hard to put us all together, and I want to give credit to them, and to recognize that we scientists, I am a scientist and a physician, we are trained to do discoveries, not to give advice. And it's a very different job. What you do to make a discovery versus what you do to give advice.
So we to do what you do now, were you trained for it?
No. So we are learning. And that is why I think the SAM unit is doing a great job, and the advisors, because we all have to learn to do that. And this is not a place to make a lobby for what we do, but to do good to the society and respond to the question they have. And that's a key point.
I wanted to, can I just follow, Joanna, I'll come to you in a minute. Can I just follow up on that in terms of the questions you look at? In terms of hot topics, and Stefan, let me stay with you for a moment. How do you go about, I mean, does it always come from a request from the politicians, or do you think we need a more iterative process where you say, we think you need science advice for this policy, and do you agree with the politicians on what you should be advising on? How does that work in practice?
So I'm going to give you an example, which maybe I shouldn't, but I'm going to be very open, right?
Okay.
So a few years ago, the Federation of European Academies of Medicine proposed from a bottom-top way to do an evidence research report how genomics influences cancer screening.
Yep.
Disappointingly to us, they did not want it. But 3 years after, they came up with a question, with a scoping paper, in which first it was how to do better with the cancers we are now screening. Do we extend it to 3 other cancers? And then the third question was our question. We did the report, they did the recommendations, and after a lot of work, the third question couldn't be answered. So if it would have gone through from us, it would have been not that useful. So I can just give you this example to understand we are interested in the most sort of latest advances, but we have to do the basics first.
Yeah. Joanna, you wanted to jump in, then Niels Erik,
First
then
of all,
Barbara, I promise I'm
I'd
coming to you.
like to give a reply also to Stefan.
Yep.
Sometimes it also works the other way around. It is the scientist that actually makes the politician go to actually try to get a governance or a positioning on a very controversial topic. And may I mention have you ever heard about solar radiation modification?
There is going to be a parallel section on it.
So if you haven't, there's quite a lot to be said about that. And Nagi knows a lot, and I think so does Stefan. But I mean, this is exactly the other way round. This is like, one of the departments in the Commission actually asked us, because we run the SAM together with our colleagues, of course, and they said, okay, what about an opinion about this? And actually they came out with a report, with recommendations, upon which the Commission just didn't sit on its hands. It said, maybe it's about time that we get some sort of corporate position on this, because we don't have it. So you see, that is like the science and what the scientists have actually said in terms of maybe you could do this, dear politicians, and maybe acting upon it, of course, within the very, very controversial, technology that it is. What I wanted to say before that, though, is that as a result also of the cancer recommendations on cancer screening, actually the Commission changed its recommendation to the Member States to actually include 3 other cancers for national screening programs, and that's the gastric, the lung, and the prostate cancer. It is a recommendation already from December 2023, and my challenge to Member States is how many of you have actually taken it up to, amend the national health services? Of course, there are many considerations. Last point, it's not only about the politicians being trained to absorb the science, which I think is really good investment to be made at early stages, not at the point that when they're already politicians. But I think it's also the other way around. I think the scientists, in actually tendering the advice and the information to politicians, they need to also keep in mind what the politician is trying to achieve. Yeah. In other words, what about the society? What about the resilience of society? What about, the overall geopolitical context and the sensitivities? I'm not suggesting that they tweak the science for that. I'm just saying keep in mind that and, obviously, channel your science and information also with that in mind. And of course, I leave the language and how to do it up to the scientists then.
Thank you. Barbara, just to come back to you in terms of the way the Minister said the case for using science advice to inform policymaking needs to be made. And she said that's part of our job as a ministry. But in terms of how that advice is received by other ministries and other politicians, and in terms of this issue of the hot topics, what scientists may think are the hot topics you need advice on versus what politicians want advice on. Is there a contradiction? Is there a tension between those two things?
Well, from case to case, I guess. But it also, coming back to the interventions before on the different roles, and what the minister said, that we now have one council for science, technology, innovation, higher education. But what we are now doing, and I think you asked or the recommendation to the member states, there is now the European Research Area Policy Agenda. Sounds very technical, but there was a political agreement last Friday in the Council of Ministers, Competitiveness/Research, to adopt this agenda for 2025 to 2027. And one of the elements to build a strong European research area is actually science for policy. So it's not nice to have, but it's part of the European agenda to implement the European research area, that all member states should now deal with the issue of science for policy in one way or the other. In Austria, we always have a national action plan that is actually endorsed by the federal government in the Council of Ministers, and we aim for that in fall this year. And one of the actions will be the Science for Policy ecosystem, where we jointly with this new council actually start also seeing what kind of advice structures there are, because of course in many countries there are very special small thematic structures as well for different fields, and all of them should of course have the same quality. I mean, when thinking of ethics and giving advice, there should be one rule book, so to speak.
Indeed.
And the idea is actually that over the next 2 years, we come up with guidelines jointly with our stakeholders, the scientific community, the universities, the research performing organizations, but also the funding agencies, because they also play an important role, with other sectorial ministries to have use cases, how they can actually have the absorption capacity. So we will see, it's a living lab, all of Austria probably, public administration also involving citizens.
Thank you. So let's come in a moment, I'm going to come out in the room, but to that issue of how we strengthen this, how we build on the success and go forward, and a couple of questions just to throw into that conversation that are written down, but I am going to come to all of you. How to ensure policymakers consistently engage with science for policy actors in the context of policy making, and does the collective EU Commission approach to science advice have benefits in terms of this multidisciplinary approach that you take versus, says the questioner, a sectorial approach at national level? We will come back on that, but first I hate to just rely entirely on Slido for my questions. So does anybody have a burning question they want to ask our panel? Or are you happy for me? Do I see a hand raised? Ah, yes. And could I ask you, please, I'll come back to you in a moment, to please introduce yourself and be very brief if you could. Thank you, sir.
Mark Boyle, Professor of Geography, Maynooth University in Ireland. My question really is about research funding agencies, Horizon 2020 and so on. There are impact agendas and statements and so on mandated as part of that, but could you just say a little bit more about how you see research funding and funding councils and Horizon Europe and so on programs fitting into the ecosystem you're trying to build?
Thank you very much. And I'm going to take one in the front and then I'm going to come back. Here.
Hello, I'm Onupama. I'm representing the rare disease patient community, health tech, med tech, and the medical researchers in public health. So my question to the whole panel is that we are always talking about engaging the civil society, but what is your idea, a very specific, strategic, systematic, regular collection of data or regular engagement with the civil society, not just events, but maybe a mechanism that collects data regularly? In my mind, it would be a simple smartphone app where any citizen with the digital ID, so we don't want any spams or bots, digital ID can actually give opinion or vote for decisions.
And that issue, that broader issue of the role of civil society in all of this, and you talked about not just ad hoc, not just here and there, but a more stable system, as indeed that we have through SAM. So please pick up on those points because they really form part of this conversation I want to have with you about where we go from here in terms of making sure the system is resilient, particularly in this current context where we see these political pressures. We have reference in some of the questions to the politicization of science as well. Niels-Erik, start us off in terms of what we really need to do. How is the role of everybody in this room evolving, and how do we need to make sure the system works for them?
I think you think I have a hang-up on politicians, but I think they are important. And also when we talk about society, it's really important. But whom are we talking to? But we need to get a resilient system to get the politicians active. Otherwise, they get their news from journals, magazines, whatever, and there might be a lot of misunderstanding going on there. So on a regular basis, the committees should meet with those who have the power to decide, not to tell them what to do, but to inform them about the ethical problems, the scientific problems, and talk about it. Just a brief thing about hot topics. There is a danger there about hot topics, that we always pick the ones that are mentioned in Science, Nature, and the journals, and we miss the really hot topics that may deserve that we dig into them and give them some time to think about them. And one of such topics that I think we all miss is that today we develop a lot of new technologies, and we look at them one by one. But if you put them together, they can do things that we couldn't really imagine. And I think there you have something which is not a hot topic by itself. But so that sort of resilience, politicians.
Naki, I know you want to come in, but I want to come to Stefan first on this. In terms of what we need to do, Stefan, and I want to just refer to the Council conclusions from 2023, because when they talked about fostering this science for policy ecosystem, their focus was on expanding capacities, build on it, expand upon it, on training, on continuous peer learning, and crucially, going back to Niels Erik's point about, I thought I'd last 1 month in a room with politicians and then I'd be off, but then he stayed, how to encourage young scientists to engage in this area, because given some of the challenges we're talking about, they may think, you know what, not for me. Stefan, how do you see the way ahead? And perhaps you can bring in this question of funding and who needs to be involved. And then, Naki, I'll come to you.
Right. So I'm going to be controversial a little bit and tell you that everything starts from scientific excellence and excellence of universities. So the main problem of Europe today is that we have expanded the number of universities, the programs of study, the number of students to very, very high numbers. That also was because we wanted to create professor positions, but at a certain point, the system is saturated. We are producing too many people with diplomas, but at the end of the day, not all of them can solve problems. So I think that we have to look very carefully at the university system that we have, because then the funding problem comes. We have a lot of people that need funding. And when you have a lot of applications, it can become a lottery, and that's not what we want. We want to have a system where the universities really identify the very best, and those are the ones that are giving the funding. The funding comes, the grants that everybody is fighting today to get, they come from prizes. So originally you had universities, and some very good people would have discoveries. They would get a prize for what they did before. This evolved into the grant, which is a prize that gives you a check to do future research. Now, the purpose of science is not to get grants or publish papers, but to do to find novel facts. So I think if we want to solve this problem, we have to go back to look very carefully at our universities in Europe.
Okay. And in terms of building the resilience of the science advice system?
Yes, so there I have to say that we have a lot more capacity than we are delivering now, because SAPEA has 110 national academies, so we can make and produce more reports. The limitation is that there are only 7 chief scientific advisors, so they cannot produce more recommendations than they can do now. But we can produce more reports, and we have, for example, produced a very important report on the transforming future of aging, which remained at the level of report and did not become at the level of, it was not transformed into recommendations. So for that, there is more capacity. But for recommendations, I don't think we have more capacity, because there are only 7 individuals.
Naki, you wanted to come in, and then I'll come to Barbara and Joanna.
I just want to build on what Stefan has said. I mean, I think that, and Niels Erik as well, resilience is the key from my point of view. And we talked a little bit before about the silos of discipline. So university reforms need to be a little bit more extensive. I think I'm not against, of course, not against the disciplines. They're the key. But we need a horizontal. And I think the horizontal is missing in all of that. And I would argue also schools, not just universities. That needs to start from the beginning. And in some ways, that's related about the question of financing. You know, I think for science, sustainable financing is the key to establish the resilience. And the reason why I'm saying that is, as far as I know, knowledge and science is not limited physically, like other human activities. Therefore, it's cumulative. That means we have to build on it. And volatility in financing and funding, I think, is the key for disaster, because by not doing, letting people go also means we are forgetting. So that's one dimension. The other one I wanted to mention that I found a challenge during the last 5 years. Despite many of the successes we had, and it was, I think, very successful, the 20 policy recommendations got lots of traction. Joanna mentioned cancer screening, but also AI in science, the idea of having a European center. So that all worked very well. One of the challenges is that policy has short cycles, needs immediate advice, and science evidence that SAPEA provides takes a long time, and then based on their scientific evidence, we provide the recommendations. That takes on the order of a year. If you think about it, Sam is 10 years old and we have 20 recommendations so far. So that's the challenge, how to make the science proactive, not necessarily just on the hot topics, because they might come and go, but try to be anticipatory, have the radar function.
Thank you. Barbara, and then and Joanna, in terms of building on the resilience of this system, particularly in the current challenging global context, and of course I want to also set this against the backdrop of we see the US withdrawing, the Commissioner referred to it, from key global scientific bodies. We are in a very challenging environment. How do you see this? And maybe you could also pick up on this issue of the role of civil society, because I know it's a topic dear to your minister's heart.
Well, actually, I would like to focus on people, because we are talking about the researchers, and you mentioned scientific excellence and universities at the heart, but Europe has fortunately moved on in developing different career models in the attractive research career discussion we had. And so it's not just scientific excellence, but also other roles and missions of institutions, and outreach activities are very important. And it could be, of course, going to schools and talk about research, because that will help people understand what research is all about, and the importance also for families maybe. And children are wonderful multipliers, actually. So if they get inspired, that will help. But also that the broader public, or knowledge transfer into the economy. So it's not just about highly cited publications, but you can be a researcher and also have a different career path. I think core facility management. I think that's important. So it's not just this one professorship, but it's a multiple, equally important career opportunities that are available. And that will take time, because of course it's a culture change within the institutions, especially for universities, to actually have a change in the mindset. But the trust in science, which is very closely linked to democracy, as we all know, needs to be built up in kindergarten, in schools, and the easiest is, and I know that the Academy of Sciences does wonderful YouTube videos. You need to go to the social media to actually reach out to the wider public, because we all live in bubbles. And with wonderful scientific advice, we will probably not be able to touch the people and individuals. So I think that's very important. And we try to do a lot, organized involvement of citizens in research projects, especially in health and public health. We have one funding organization which does it with each of the projects and institutes they are building up. So it's a slow process, but it's developing. And funding agencies can, of course, make a difference, because if they do not only insist that there is open science and publications, but also that there is a short description of what they have been doing, in order to be able to be understood by a regular citizen and publish that helps.
Fascinating, thank you. Joanna, to this issue of resilience, but also could you perhaps say 2 words going back to this retreat of important actors, most notably the US, from that sort of international cooperation on science and that withdrawing of the US from key bodies like the World Health Organization and so on. How do you see Europe's role in safeguarding global science advice in the face of this?
I mean, I'm glad you mentioned international collaboration, because I think we need to keep on giving the message that we're open to collaborate with whoever. First of all, with all the world who wants to collaborate with us. I think, through the Horizon program, we have given that, in practice, that pragmatic approach of associating with like-minded countries who want to invest with us, including with the US, of course. I mean, it was their doing if they wanted to withdraw. But I think we need to keep on giving, together with like-minded countries, the message that international collaboration, science diplomacy, is really the key to really, invest in the resilience of our societies and to be prepared for the challenges of the future and today's challenges as well. But I wanted also to add a couple of points about citizens engagement. Apart from, the point that Nagi made about sustainable finance, I think we also need to give that message that, by the way, we want to invest in research. We want to invest in research, we want to invest in the pipeline also towards innovation. But I think frontier research, we need to keep putting in the logs in the fire if we want the fire really to keep going. And I think we really need to keep that message also for the benefit of young people who are thinking about career paths, at an early age. But I wanted to give some examples about citizens' engagement. There are various ways of how you can do that. I mean, we do quite a lot in the Commission of dedicated surveys, and not only with stakeholders, but with the public at large about particular topics. But I think maybe if I could, you'll allow me to draw on very
briefly, if you would.
Examples on the cancer mission, which I'm sure you've heard about. But we've just launched last week in Warsaw the first ever national cancer hub, and all the member states will be following suit in good time. What is the idea? It is the concept behind that's interesting for research and how to use research and data, including patient data. But the idea about the National Cancer Hub is to bring not only the policymakers together and the scientists and the researchers, but also the patients and also the public at large who are working, maybe in charities, maybe in organizations, for types of cancer. And this to be a mainstay for cancer. Why? Because there are so many aspects of cancer that we think we know about. It's not only about the science and how to treat it, but it's about new types of cancers, rare cancers, young people who are surviving cancer and their life after that. So it's basically looking at the problem from a scientific point of view with scientific data, including patient data, for which we have also created a platform thanks to the Cancer Mission at a European level, but also the way that we actually get to the solutions.
Okay, I'm going to have to stop you there because we are almost out of time, and I want to put you all a bit on the spot here, because I want to come back really to this moment, this idea that this is also, amidst all the challenges you've talked about, a unique opportunity for Europe to really lead on science advice and demonstrate that leadership, and link this to our building bridges. If each of you had to give some advice, whether it be from a policymaker perspective to science and ethics advisors or the other way round, one piece of advice on how we ensure that science for policy, those who engage in it, really can deliver, and that politicians will take it up, impact, let's put it simply, that it has that impact that you are all looking for. What would your one piece of advice be navigating the complexities as well? I'm going to come straight down the line, Stefan. So I started this way with my first question, so I'm going to come, and I'm afraid it's 1 minute each. I never keep people from their coffee. Joanna first, and then straight down the line, Barbara last.
Okay, my advice in one sentence would be focus, and this is towards the scientists, focus on earning your seat at the table where you influence. Now, that means you need to think about the science, how to communicate that science in a way that is understood, that is digestible to the politicians, that you're also aware of where the politician wants to go in terms of impact, and that you're also investing in the societal resilience. So I think, that's a way of how to look at the science and the scientist being also part of the policy decision-making table.
Thank you very much. Niels Erik.
I can say I agree with all that Joanna said, except one thing she didn't say, and ethics.
Yeah.
It should be English.
True.
Very good. Yeah, and never forget that those issues have to be addressed as well. They're very much part of the picture alongside the other issues. Stefan.
So this is advice from the politicians to the scientists or from the scientists to the politicians?
It can be either way round.
Okay, so it would be from the
or both.
Politicians both. So it would be to the scientists to answer the question and transform complicated things into simple things, and not the other way around, because there is a tendency to use complexity to cultivate complexity. And the most difficult thing is to transform a complex problem into a simple one. And on the other hand is to ask the politicians to really get motivated to understand a little bit of science. And that is why at the SAPEA we want to make a little booklet about any incoming member of parliament or member of the commission with the basics of scientific advice and where they can find it.
Brilliant idea. Naki.
Yeah, I think this discussion has shown that we are capable of a positive narrative about the bridge from science to policy and to diplomacy. But my take is that also we need the bridge in the back. It has to be interactive, and we need to involve the society. That was one of the questions. So I think science for that has to reform itself. I think we have to establish the traditional trust we had in the science. I think that's a Herculean job ahead, from my point of view, in the age of AI. And I think part of that is to try also to grab the opportunities and show where the opportunities are. As you know, many of you know the Chinese saying, every crisis has seeds of opportunity, and I think Europe now can perhaps fill that niche that is being created through international collaboration and science diplomacy.
And it is always when Europe is at its best, when it faces a crisis. Barbara.
Well, for the politicians, try to understand a little bit how research works. For the researchers, try to understand what politics is all about. And don't forget public administration, because it's public administration actually then implementing and giving advice and making sure that it can really go to parliament and be adopted, and civil society, because in the end it's all about the civil society.
Thank you so much. And one suggestion from someone in our audience who said, perhaps we need more success stories, case studies, where science advice had a real impact, solved an important problem to get different groups on board. I throw that into the mix. We don't have time to discuss it, but will you join me in thanking our panel for a brilliant start to our discussions? Thank you. Stay there just for a moment. We are going to take a now 23, I stole 2 minutes from your coffee break, having promised not to. We are going to take a 25-minute break until 3 o'clock, and then we're going to start the parallel sessions, and we're going to come back in those sessions and go much deeper into some of the issues we've discussed. They start at 3 o'clock. You didn't have to pre-register, so just go to the one that interests you most. If the room gets full, then maybe go to another one. But just so I can tell you what they are and where they are. Science advice in a contested world. Joanna mentioned solar radiation modification. We're going to hear about a very contested topic where they managed to come up with some coherent policy advice. How did they do it? The great policy debate, national interests versus global goals. How do you balance potentially conflicting priorities at the different levels? And why transformative economic change remains elusive, bridging the gap between science and policy. And this will look at the barriers to change and the pathways. The first two are in the rooms opposite. Science advice in a contested world. Sorry, that one is downstairs. The Anton Zeliger room is downstairs. Go through where you had coffee to start with and you will find the room. Upstairs, on the right-hand side is the great policy debate, and on the left-hand side is the transformative economic change. And then I will see you back here. We'll have a little break, 15 minutes after the parallels. Then we'll come back here and hear more about building that ecosystem for science for policy. Thank you for now. See you later on. quickly as possible, please, as we do need to get underway. If everyone could take their seats. Thank you so much. So what do you think? Oh. To get underway. Thank you. If you could take your seats very quickly now. Okay, as the last few people trickle in, we're going to get underway because we have another packed and informative session for you. And then you're going to be wondering what these little coloured notes are on the arms of your chairs. You will need them later. I will tell you why. But for now, just keep them safely by you. So, welcome back to this plenary session where we're going to build on the very rich discussions that we had this morning as we consider towards stronger science for policy ecosystem in Europe, building capacity and enabling learning. So we're going to hear about what the Commission is doing. We're going to hear about a mutual learning experience, some of the things that came out of that, what some of the participants in it took away, and then we will look to the future. And by the way, just to mention, we won't forget the very rich discussions that you've been having in your parallel sessions. Tomorrow in our fishbowl session, we're going to hear from some people who were in those parallel sessions very briefly about what you talked about. But then during the fishbowl, there'll be an opportunity for you to raise together anything that came out of those discussions that you think is particularly important to share with those who couldn't be in your parallel session. But to get us underway and set the scene for this session, I'm delighted to give the floor to Alessandro Allegra from the European Commission's Directorate General for Research and Innovation. Alessandro, over to you.
Thank you, Jackie, and thanks everyone for being here. So, we've heard a lot this morning about the political context of science advice, the urgency, the recognition of the value of scientific and ethical advice to policy. But what does it actually mean to build stronger science for policy ecosystems, to build the bridges that we're talking about? What are we doing at the institutional level to actually bridge this gap? And today, now, we will tell you a little bit about some of the initiatives which have been carried out by the Commission, working together with our counterparts in the Member States, in the community, to actually institutionalize science for policy, to strengthen the ecosystem of science for policy in Europe. And one thing to keep in mind here is that I think what emerged quite clearly is that we need a concerted effort. We need a policy of science for policy, if you wish. So we've been working quite hard in the past year or so, since we got the political mandate from the Council to strengthen the science for policy ecosystem in Europe, to actually implement that. And we're very happy to see that this has been picked up quite well by policymakers in the research innovation space from all across Europe, and beyond the research innovation space, also in many other thematic ministries. So today we want to share with you the experience that we have been doing over the past year through a mutual learning exercise supported by the Policy Support Facility of Horizon Europe. This is an instrument that we have in the Commission to work with the Member States to help them develop their thinking, their positions on certain issues of R&I policy based on mutual learning. Different countries have different ways of doing things. Some might be a little bit ahead of others, might have tried things that did work or did not work, and they want to share that learning. So this is an instrument that we've been using on many different topics, and over the past 12 months, we carried out a mutual learning exercise on science for policy, specifically. We had 15 countries participating. We held 4 meetings over the year, hosted by 4 different countries. Each was an occasion to hear from representatives of the science for policy ecosystem of that country about how it's organized, but also to reflect around certain thematic issues. We reflected on the issue of what does it even mean to do science for policy. How do you map out the ecosystems? What are the key functions and actors in the ecosystems? How do you assess and evaluate science for policy ecosystems? And the issue of trust in science for policy, which is something that came up quite prominently in the opening discussion. So throughout this exercise, for each of the workshops, we worked with representatives of national research ministries and agencies, with experts. We produced a series of reports, one for each of the 4 thematic areas. And now we have prepared a final report that sums up the learnings of this exercise, which will be presented today. So we use the occasion of this conference also to launch the final report of this exercise, and we will be hearing from some of the participants about how they engage with this exercise, what they've learned, but also especially what they're doing back in their home countries, in their home institutions, to really build a stronger European science for policy ecosystem. And with this, I'll pass the floor to Ilke, the rapporteur of our exercise, who will present the findings of the report. Thank you.
Delighted to welcome Ilkka Tuomi, an independent expert and the rapporteur for this mutual learning experience, and he's going to take us through those main findings and those conclusions. Ilkka, over to you.
Yeah, so I'm going to very briefly kind of outline the report so that you will know why you want to read it. And we will also have the panel where you actually have the participants kind of discussing the topics. But as said, we had a year-long process and we produced 4 thematic reports. One that looked mainly the kind of knowledge-based approach to science for policy. Another that was looking the kind of structures of these ecosystems. A third one that was looking how to evaluate and assess ecosystems, science for policy ecosystems. And the fourth one that was looking specifically the questions related to trust. The starting point for this whole mutual learning exercise was that we should be thinking science for policy in the context of ecosystems. So it's not only some kind of evidence and facts coming to policymakers, but actually there is a kind of bigger social system underpinning this. And as you all know, it is a very complex system. So science itself is very heterogeneous. You have very many different types of thought communities, as Fleck was saying in 1930s already, that compose different kind of scientific communities. They have different ideas what counts as evidence and what are the methodologies that produce knowledge, and they have very kind of different kind of epistemic contexts. So even in the science itself, it's a very complicated ecosystem, and you have to integrate many different types of knowledge to actually generate something that is useful for policymakers. But now we are talking about integrating policymakers to that system. And policymakers, of course, themselves have very varied views of how to understand the world and what are the value-based kind of assessments of what counts as evidence, what is relevant evidence, and so forth. And beyond that even, we now involve the public. So we have very complex systems, and the science itself has been kind of broken out into many different complex systems that have to integrate. Then we have also these actors. We have kind of institutionalized actors in this system, and they have evolved during the time to create some kind of relations that are more or less stable. So the idea of ecosystem in this sense is the starting point. But of course, if you have biologists here, you know that this is nothing like an ecosystem, because we also have intentions and we want to deliver something. This is a system that has objectives and goals and tries to produce something. Ecosystems don't really do that. But anyway, the idea to have this kind of relational view is the starting point. And then this is a QR code. I will show it later as well, so you can find the report easily. From this ecosystem perspective, then we try to, this was a mutual learning exercise, and mutual learning means that 12 months ago we understood science for policy in a very specific way, and in different ways. Participants had different ideas, and the mutual learning process itself tries to create new views, how we should understand this. So it is a learning process. And I think what we learned in that process is on this one slide. I don't have many slides, but this is basically the kind of key insight. So first is that, yes, we have to consider science for policy in the context of ecosystems, this kind of relational view where you have these many different kind of interests, actors, epistemologies, methodologies, and so forth. And you have to integrate policymakers into this kind of. So the first report was very much looking this kind of organizational sense-making, knowledge creation perspective to science and policy. So these are complex systems. The next, for you, I guess, already kind of obvious thing, we wanted to highlight that we are moving from the kind of, let's say, the what we called actually old school model of science for policy, where you actually create some kind of evidence and facts which are then thrown over to policymakers, and they are supposed to do something with those facts and evidence. Well, this is of course much more complicated process. What we were saying, that we actually have to look beyond the boundaries themselves, and that the knowledge processes are not kind of separate in this science part and the policy part, but we actually have to look what the policymakers need to be able to do kind of more informed policies. So we go to this kind of relational co-creation approaches. This in itself is something that, I mean, like Joint Research Center has been talking about a long time, and other science for policy actors. But we try to push the boundaries a bit, and I simply say that where I see that we pushed the boundary is that we are actually looking in the final report also science for policy as a learning process. So it's not just evidence use and production, but it's a learning process, and specifically it's a learning process for policymakers. So how they are able to integrate knowledge into their policy processes. And this requires that also they, not only this mutual learning exercise, but also policy experts, policymakers have to change the way that they see the world. And that's how science, in a way, helps policymakers. So we talk about tacit knowledge and all these kinds of things which have been discussed much before, but in a way that we think that what the policymakers need to make their policies more intelligent. And this is the plus part. So we are not only talking about communities of practice or this kind of co-creation itself, but we are also touching these questions at how policymakers can learn to use knowledge more efficiently. And on the other hand, how the other partners in this ecosystem have to do the same kinds of things. Anyway, so there is something new, I think, in this final report as well. We are also talking about science helping policy experimentation, because these problems are very complicated, complex in kind of technical sense, it is impossible to know what are the impact of some knowledge or something. You have to go much more to co-creative modes also in the policy processes. So policy itself is changing as well today. So it's going to be, it's already much more kind of experimentation-oriented learning process there. So we are also touching those things. Also, anticipation is critical, and it's also interesting. We are mentioning that topic also in the final report. We are also, in policy arenas, we are using future-oriented knowledge, and we cannot have evidence for future in the traditional sense because the future does not exist. So the question is that how you integrate anticipatory policy making to science for policy is also one of the topics that are touched there. Trust, as was mentioned, is central. That's one of the key insights. And then we also discussed the digital transformation, specifically the AI, how it changes the whole system of science, how it produces, we talk about misinformation, disinformation, malinformation even in this context, and it's going to be a very important topic in the future. The systems are complex also because the actors really are doing different things. So they are not doing only science for policy, but they have other missions and other kind of objectives. So science for policy, in a way, is one aspect of these actors' work. Okay, so these are the basically, if I just want to kind of give you an elevator pitch, that this type of stuff we discussed, and I think we learned something about those. Based on that, we also try to understand where are the problems of science for policy today in these different member states participating in the AMALI. And from these challenges that we kind of observed and detected in our discussions, then we try to derive some kind of recommendations. So we actually discussed that in the report, and we came up with 8 recommendations.
Be fairly brief on them.
And this is, I think, the last slide. So the obvious one is to govern science for policy at the ecosystem level. All these are discussed in more detail in the report. Second is that the collaboration is really important, sure. Then we have to integrate foresight with anticipatory policy making. That's maybe slightly bit newer. We have to recognize and reward policy engagement. That's what we are doing already. But there is something, a discussion on that in the report as well. We have to develop science for policy capacity with policymakers, but also with science. That's something we have been discussing here a lot. And increase transparency, accountability, strengthen scientific integrity, evaluate ecosystems, not only their components. So basically these are the kind of top-level recommendations. This is the QR code, and the report is available. It was just published a couple of days ago. So this was just the elevator pitch. I think you will find interesting content. But now I think we have the panel.
We do indeed, yeah. And they're going to talk about what they got out of all of this. I mean, you've talked about those challenges you identified and the recommendations, but we also wanted to hear from some practitioners about what they learned from it. Thank you so much. Will you join me in thanking Ilkka very much indeed? And very much, and apologies for that, Ilkka, very much a whistle-stop tour we had to do today. But with that QR code, you can find the full report and lots more information. And if you have any questions, we'll have a brief time for questions later. I'm sure Ilkka wouldn't mind taking any of them. But as Ilkka said, we wanted to hear from some people who were involved in this process about what they got out of it and what they see as the next steps. So this is a panel on unlocking potential in widening countries through mutual learning. I'm delighted to welcome on stage 4 people who took part in the mutual learning exercise. Please do come and join me as I introduce you. Leonora Harty from the Department of Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science in Ireland. Come and sit next to me, Leonora. Salomea Vangienne, I hope I didn't massacre your name too much, Salomea, from the Research Council of Lithuania. Julia Prikozovits from the Federal Ministry of Women, Science and Research here in Austria. Julia, lovely to have you with us. And Mariana Hankova from the Department of the Minister for Science, Research and Innovation in the Czech Republic. And if you do have a question, either for Ilka or for any of them, perhaps we could pop up the QR code briefly so that people who didn't scan it earlier can do so. Okay, I just want to have a chat with them. I've not asked them to present, I've asked them just to talk to me. So Leonora, in terms of, I want to look at this from two angles. Firstly, for you, the experience for you personally, and what it meant for you, and then from your country's perspective, from your organization's perspective, and what you've done with the results. So, first of all, for you, what did you take away? What was the most important learning that you've taken away from this exercise? Did it change the way you think about things? Did it change your approach?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, I suppose I came to this about 3 years ago, and when I came into it, I probably looked at the world of science for policy or research for policy in terms of, like, you have people on the knowledge supply side and people on the knowledge demand side. But actually what really helped me going through the MLE with my lovely network here was, I suppose, the deeper conceptual understanding of the science for policy ecosystem. And that really, it's not transactional. It's really about the relationships between the actors and the functions within it, and that it's really in particular, the first kind of session we had around knowledge management was very informative, because it really focuses on science for policy as that social interaction. It's about the tacit knowledge, the way evidence moves between the various different actors, and it's relational. So I think that really changed my thinking on it, and that we need to really focus on building the relationships between the actors within that ecosystem. And from there, it flows into all those issues that we talked about around trust and inclusivity. So I think that's the key thing.
So when it came to building those relationships and taking all this back to your organizations, because as we heard from Ilka, it's a learning process for you, but then also for your organizations. Have you been able to use this to mobilize people within your organization to change the way things are done at all?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, to be fair, we're going through kind of a transitional process in Ireland anyway, in the sense that there's been some significant developments over the last year, in particular the last couple of years, around this space. We have a new research and innovation agency, which is underpinned by an RNI Act, which has policy-related research as a specific function. So that's driving that change. We also have a new government science advisor that's a completely new role. So it's kind of in that period where it's coming on stream and it's growing anyway. But having the MLE, not only in terms of, I suppose, developing my own understanding, but being able to bring back those experiences and those practices from different countries.
Perfect timing, really, because now is when you want to feed into that process of change.
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
Thank you. I want to come back about how we build on this for the future in a little while, but let me continue. Salomea, from your perspective, what did you personally take away most of all, above all else, from this exercise?
First of all, I bring a great friendship with the people that I met from different countries, and I understood that we have a lot of different roadmaps for the evidence-informed policymaking. We don't have one clear recipe to use. That's for me, for example, someone's necessary advisors established, another maybe they have some bodies. So first of all, we need to understand what kind of ecosystem we have in our countries, and how we can foster them stronger to make it. And of course, for me personally, evaluation, how we evaluate the process. Because when you speak with the policymakers, they need evidence here and now, but you cannot, like Ilka mentioned, we cannot say that we will have answer for the future. So it's very hard to answer, and these actors, like my colleague mentioned, that we need to have a long discussion. So in my country, I must say, I bring the knowledge that we discuss. All these 4 reports was bring for them. And after that, I share it, and it's very hard to explain what kind of outcome it will be, because it's past maybe a few months after this, our mutual learning exercise. But what I can clearly say, we have documents that we can point the finger, let's say, on the topics and say, you see, this country also has something similar or something different. So we raise the discussion. With the discussion, we can find the question. When we have a question, maybe we can find the answer and raise this question for scientists and help them to find the road for the future.
And have you found colleagues to be receptive to these messages?
Of course I find. What kind of question can it be?
But it is making, you think in the long term it will make a difference. It's, as you say, hard to measure now precisely what.
The question is if we will still keep on this topic, because sometimes we have the topic on the top, first one, but after time we get tired on this topic, and if we will not get tired to raise the question that we need a scientist, that we need politicians, that we need different roles, that we need different actors in this ecosystem, I think this will be useful. In Lithuanian case, I think it brings good issues, it's my personal opinion, because we have knowledge, I must to say, and I have people who we discuss. We have more and more. Okay, my table around is maybe 10 or 15 people. Maybe I have another more.
Thank you, Julia. From your perspective, personally first, what has it meant to you?
So to me, first of all, as other MLE colleagues have said, it was way too short. So I think 1 year was not enough to tackle this very complex issue. And I think this is what we realized, really, that it's so complex that, you know, it entails different actors, what Ilka has been saying as well, different sectors. And so it could have gone on for at least another half a year for me. So in my case, in Austria, how have I established kind of a working environment around this? I created a sounding board composed of the council, what was mentioned today by the minister, the new Council of Sciences, Innovation and Technology, FORWIT, a representative of those, of the council, and as well of this house, of the Academy of Sciences. And I pre-discussed, and also after the meetings, I again shared knowledge that was kind of accumulated during the MLE meetings with them. And that already provided me with a more holistic view, going beyond that of a mere kind of ministerial line ministry view, and extended that already. And what have I personally taken from this? So I realized, as was what has been said, the challenges are quite similar across countries, but we have different historical, cultural, political governance systems and backgrounds. But nevertheless, okay, there is no one size fits all, yes, agreed. But I think we can find commonalities, and probably still a lot of collective thought has to be put into these commonalities. And I think the European Commission has helped us a lot in this, and will further do so.
Thank you very much indeed. So Mariana, so far, a great consensus as this really was personally enriching, as well as the basis for this work to start in different formats in the organizations. Would you echo that? How was it for you?
Yeah, it's really hard to follow that because I feel the same.
Well, that's good.
And first and foremost, I think it gave me perspective and a bit of optimism, because sometimes it's easy to feel like the challenges we face in Czechia are somehow unique to our context, or rooted in our culture even. But then, behold, there's other countries that face the same challenges, and even some countries that manage to overcome those. So that's inspirational and gives us hope that there's hope for us too, to go forward with this. And also about the broader scope that you talked about. From the governmental point of view, we focus most on the incremental steps that are actionable, what we can do and actually achieve in this term that we have. And the MLEs managed to remind me of the broader scope of science for policy, and that it's important to keep in mind the bigger picture as well.
Thank you very much. And you said that sense of incremental change that you've been working on. So what, identifying the low-hanging fruits? Where can we change things more easily? Where will it be more difficult? Is that what you're doing?
Well, for example, with the fragmentation that's been discussed all around, we have that too as well, and the tacit knowledge around. So what we're focusing on is to concentrate the information for public administration and the analytical units. For example, how to finance their research needs, which stakeholders they can reach out to, where to find data, or even the analysis and recommendations from the European Commission that frame the science for policy ecosystem. So that's the low-hanging fruit, is just to create a website and meet with the analytical units and tell them that. But otherwise, we're passing a new law on science, research, innovation, and knowledge transfer, which even introduces the concept of knowledge transfer, because this hasn't been done before. So just to officially acknowledge that it exists and it's something that we want. That's not really the low-hanging fruit as you want it to, but it's there as well.
Thank you very much. And staying with you so that you don't, because it's always worse when you're on the end of a row and you say, well, I agree with everyone else. So when it comes to where we go from here, and you've all talked about different countries, different systems, but some commonalities, some common challenges. But what do you believe needs to be done? What would you be priorities to, across Europe as a whole, strengthen the science for policy enabling environment, if you like? What are the framework conditions and the support you need to go on building? And someone in our audience is saying, how would you share knowledge from countries with strong expertise across Europe and build a European science advisory ecosystem? So I'm wondering the degree to which you look at this through a national lens, but also through a European lens at the same time. Mariana, what do you need? What needs to change, if anything? What do you?
No easy questions.
You started with an optimistic note. What are the challenges and where do you need more support?
Well, for example, we need more incentives for scientists to actually engage with policymakers. So I think that's something that can also be done at the European level, which we can use as well. I was thinking about this question a lot. And I think also just publicly declaring the support of science for policy over and over again is something that's really useful, because the more you hear it, the more you acknowledge it, the more you take it as a given, and the less people oppose it.
So the recognition that it matters, that everyone in this room agrees. Yeah. And it's interesting you picked up on incentives as the key point, because someone indeed also in our audience talking about how can the system change so that science advice becomes beneficial for scientists. We're talking about encouraging people to engage with it, particularly young researchers like people like you. But how do you get that really make it something people want to do? So I was very struck by what Niels Erik said earlier when he said, first of all, when he got in a room with politicians, he thought, I don't want to do this. This will not last because they'll drive me insane. And then he was converted to the process. So how do we make it incentivized? Julia, for you, in terms of what needs to change, what needs to be done to build on what you've learned now and really go further?
Mm-hmm. So first of all, I think that we all agree that this is a long-term process. So it's something that is about changing minds, of changing political styles, changing probably also political leadership, public administration leadership, scientific leadership. So it takes a while to engage with this policy culture an engagement culture that needs to take place in both worlds, in fact. So in Austria, what we will do immediately after this MLE is to embark, as my Director General has said as well, on the ERA initiative on science for policy. We will have a national action plan. And we tried to gather the key players of the system. And so maybe this is something where, I'm always looking a bit at my European colleagues, where we would kind of need some leadership from you guys, so what we're trying to do or to construct is some sort of code of conduct or guidelines on S4P, on the S4P ecosystem in Austria. And if there would be something like, call it framework, call it code of good standards or code of conduct at European level where we could actually direct our thinking to, going towards a common direction, it could be helpful. But having said that, again, no one size fits all, celebrating the diversity, but I think it would give us some drive into which direction to go collectively. And, we're also glad that we're having these sheets here on the table where I think the Commission can do a lot in furthering our collective thought about this. But I do think that these, networks and community of practices will probably need some thematic angle as well, in the sense of having a common agenda on I don't know, being food policy or something that would give us drive on topics.
Thank you very much indeed. Salomea, from your perspective, what do you want from these guys? Julia was very clear. She looked straight in the eye and told them what she wanted. What more do you need? Or more broadly, what do you think the framework conditions need to be to really deliver on this?
I think, sorry, you got me in the moment. I cannot get my words now. I think that basically what needs to keep in touch, because sometimes during the daily work, you forgot to write something, and just some small pitch, how you're going, it's how you're working science for policy in your area. Just, you know, we have multitasking every day after COVID-19. We are distant working. Another point of view, maybe just raising the topics was important for more countries, not only for one, maybe in smaller regions, because in, like, let's say Lithuania, and we speak in the Baltic states, what kind of help science can give, what kind of foresight we can look. Because for nowadays, I manage everything to do, and it's very hard to ask for me. Maybe it's for my culture to ask some help, but sometimes when they bring, okay, we can do this, 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 okay, I will jump in and then join. Or maybe I can be a transaction of the knowledge, of information, because what during this mutual learning exercise I learned, they bring the report, they bring the questions, bring some knowledge. I'm very happy to share from my networks, for the knowledge. So for my case, I look from that moment like this.
Thank you very much. And really, you're saying, because you all talked about how personally enriching this was and how you created these great friends and contacts. Keeping that network going is for you part of...
Yes, because sometimes to create something is very easy. I can say we create the network in our case in Lithuania, and we have science and innovation advisors, but what it's keeping in my mind, how to keep it going, how keeping it alive, how raise this occurrence that is important in the future. Because to start is easy, but continue, this is still not answer question for me.
Thank you very much, Leonora. Complete the picture in terms of what we need to do as we go forward.
Well, I think my colleagues have probably hit on all the main things here, but I think that business of consolidating on what we've learned and capitalising on these relationships now. I mean, we covered so much in 1 year in the MLE, but I think really this requires a cultural shift and an ongoing commitment to keep this driving forward. So I suppose there is that community of practice which is kicking off now, which is really useful, and I think it's still linked into that. But I think there's scope there to widen the net and start bringing in early stage researchers in there and see who else we can bring into that community. And that then itself acts as an incentive, because you're bringing in or you're incentivizing earlier researchers or early stage researchers to engage, so.
Thank you very much. We are almost out of time, but does anybody have a burning question either for our wonderful speakers on the stage or indeed for Ilka or Alessandro? I see one over there. Let me come get some exercise here and come to you with a microphone. And please introduce yourself and please be as brief as possible. Wave at me again. There you are. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Laura. I'm from the University's Policy Engagement Network in the UK with my colleague Arlene. My question is around the role of arts and humanities in the ecosystem and how we can better incentivize or support arts and humanities to engage with everything we've just talked about, both in university sectors and policy-making spaces.
Thank you. And the role of humanities indeed was mentioned by the Austrian minister in her opening speech. Any quick thoughts on that?
I might just jump in there. I suppose it's something we are trying to actively do in Ireland, and I mentioned our new research and innovation agency, Research Ireland, and what that was initially was two separate agencies, one that was focused on STEM and one that funded all disciplines. But I suppose there was kind of a recognition really that particularly, and not that it's all focused on policy relevant research, that it does fund blue skies research as well, but I think bringing those together meant that we could actually really tackle societal challenges in a much broader way and a much more multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary way as well, recognising that. So I suppose that was kind of the starting point. I've also been, I suppose, I'm just thinking of a session there, and I think it was mentioned at the previous session, the importance of societal and the arts, humanities and social sciences in responding to these challenges. Like we talked about it there, just around environmental challenges. How do we make it's not just about the science, it's about the behavioural changes. Okay. So I think there's that recognition as well.
Thank you. Going to squeeze one more quick one in.
So my name is Selim Louafi. I'm Deputy Director for Research and Strategy at CIRAD, and together with FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, we've developed a guidance on strengthening science policy interface ecosystem at the national level for food system transformation, and which apply actually to other topics than just because it has some kind of generic and our experience, and we've piloted that guidance. So to my knowledge, is the first guidance document that exists at the global level, at the UN level, on this institutional strengthening of science policy ecosystem. And we've piloted in different countries in the global south. And I wanted to also just share that experience because I just came back from Senegal, where we had a workshop of 2 days to discuss that. And the main learning from that workshop is that it's a new exercise for a lot of people in this ecosystem to think about how to strengthen the policy, the science policy process, because nobody has really a mandate to think about that, nor even the competence to think about that. So it's also about how to provide, to empower people to really engage and in this kind of...
Thank you very much. Thank you. So we can find that on the on a website?
Yes, it's available on FAO website. So it's called Guidance on Strengthening Science Policy Interface at the National Level for...
a short, snappy title there for you. But anyway, go on the FAO website, you will find it. That is all we have time for in this session. So will you join me in thanking our wonderful panel very much indeed? Thanks. So, before we move on, we want to hear a little bit about some of the things that the Joint Research Centre of the European Commission has been up to in this area in relation to technical support instruments. And I'm delighted to welcome Anne-Griet Keizer to tell us more about it. Over to you, Anne-Griet.
Thank you very much, Jackie, and thank you for this opportunity to speak here. I think I can say that I will not repeat, but say a lot that's in line with the previous speakers. And I think that's a good thing. That means that we're on a joint track and that we're making a joint effort to really improve evidence-informed policy making and science for policy on the European level. The JRC has contributed with what we call the IEPM project. Some of you know it better as the TSI project, but TSI is just, it stands for Technical Support Instrument. It's an instrument of the European Commission, and there are several TSI projects. So we're trying now to change it to IEPM project. We just finished the first round with 7 countries. 2 countries were here on the stage, the Czech Republic and Lithuania. And the exciting thing is that this fall we will start a second round with 7 other countries, including also Ireland and Austria. So we're very much looking forward to working with Julia and Leonora. This is an instrument used, financed by the European Commission, but it's a really in-depth project. It takes 30 months, and it has both national components and multinational components. So all these 7 countries are analyzed over 30 months with different phases, with different reports. First a diagnostic report, a needs and assessment reports, and in the end a roadmap. So a country-specific roadmap with recommendations that are tailor-made to improve the national ecosystem in that country. In combination with that, we also organized capacity building workshop where also the people from these countries meet each other. There were workshops for scientists, for policymakers, and for knowledge brokers, all aimed at building their competences and capacities. And third, there were mutual learning exercises on topics which are also not only now relevant, but also for the future of evidence-informed policymaking. And those were foresight, evaluation, and AI. So we closed this project last March with a big conference with over 250 people. And there we presented this reflection paper, because we're not expecting that you will all read for 7 countries all these reports, but if you read this reflection paper, the QR code will bring you to it, then you get the main lessons, the more general main lessons that we take out of this project, but also the agenda we get from it for the future. So I'm not going to talk about all these elements, but you can already see there's a lot of overlap with what was discussed just now. But I think a big difference is the in-depth analysis. So this project takes 30 months. That is a long time. And in that project, we also use the ecosystem approach. That is also very important. And with that approach, we were able to widen the discussion and to connect. So widen, as Ilke also said, meant going further than the traditional dichotomy of science on the one side and policy on the other side. It's really the ecosystem metaphor that all these players and their interactions between them are what is really important. So with this project, we were also able to connect all these stakeholders. The project gave a lot of stakeholders that are normally not on all the tables now sort of legitimacy to be involved in the discussion on the future of their national ecosystem. And through these discussions, we saw that there's a vital range for knowledge brokerage. In some countries, it's more developed. In other countries, it's not really known yet, or people are doing it but are not realizing that they are doing it. So this is for us an important lesson. And last, as was said also very much in the panel, it's not about a one-size-fits-all approach. It's about recognizing how the government system or the national culture really matters. But that does not mean that you can also learn from each other and can exchange. So key lessons. What was really helpful is that with this project, we provided a shared language and a platform for interaction in these countries. But what also very much came out of it is that an IAPM ecosystem does not self-coordinate. It needs a form of coordination. That is not, again, one size fits all, and it doesn't always have to be top-down. But in every country, we identified ways to strengthen this coordination and make sure that people really connect and really have a conversation. Another thing that really came out of it and relates a bit to the question that is the importance of interdepartmental and interdisciplinary way of working, and also connecting these two. Because sometimes it's on the science side that we work interdisciplinary, but then at the policymaker side, it's still very silos. And we need this at both sides. And lastly, skills and competences are extremely important. This is recognized in all the countries, but not all countries have found ways to do this in a more structural way. So this also was very good input for the agenda of the JRC. What are we going to work on in the coming times? We will be working on a knowledge broker manifesto. And the idea behind that is that we want to make more a statement that knowledge brokers is a profession. It is something that you can learn. Not everybody has to learn it, but by stating that it is a profession, we hope to be more supportive for the people that are interested in doing it. Second is a European framework for IAPM that may be something in line with what Julia is mentioning. We are going to explore this, but what for us is vital is that this is not only about how do you produce science or scientific evidence, but also how do you use it, or how do you make sure that you use it. So it's really about connecting the two sides, because we see that in a lot of countries there's a lot of evidence produced, but there are all these barriers that it's not being used. And it isn't because politicians are not interested or just are stupid. That's not the case. But we need to help them to overcome the barriers they have in using it. So we work on some other things, but the last one is really important. What came out of this first round of this project is the question from these 7 countries, like, okay, this was really cool, and we met everybody, not just within our country, but also between these countries. But what now? Does it stop here? Does it end? Because we're not done yet. And I think we believe that you will never be done. So motivated by this, we decided to think about a European community of practice to continue these conversations. So we already had a first co-creation workshop where we had also the colleagues from RTD that were there, so the other colleagues from the Commission. We had people from the first 7 countries. We had people from the next 7 countries. and some others in a room where we co-created together, okay, what should this community look like? This was a very important first step, and we're now at the phase where we're thinking, okay, this is a start. We are going to invest now, at least for a year with each other, in creating activity within this community, to see where it leads us, to see what we can do with each other. The community is sort of started. It's still in early phases, but we're now at the point where we can invite other people to join us. So if you're interested in joining this community, fill in the expression of interest form or email us. I think we can make sure that this information will also later be shared in a way that you can use the links. For who is it for? It's for all professionals that want to advance knowledge brokers for better evidence-informed policy making, including science for policy across Europe. So it's very broad, as long as you're motivated to contribute to that goal, and as long as you're also willing not only to come and get something, but also to bring something. It's a community that we have to create together. And with that, I think we go.
Hang on. We'll click those back if we could. Yes. Thank you very much indeed, Angry. Thank you. And as you just saw, because she clicked through to the next slide, I'm delighted to welcome on stage our final speaker of this session to talk about the way forward and next steps, Karen Fabry from DG Research and Innovation. Karen, do you want... Have this. How nice to see you.
Jackie, yes, you can hear me. So I'm honored to close this session, which has been very rich. I'm just going to put on my glasses so I can see. I think that's an important part of the science for policy process, is that you can see what you're going to talk about. So, I mean, we've heard some very important points raised. I can just report back some keywords. This is really about relationship building, trust building. It's a long-term process. It's not going to happen overnight. That's why we really need to come together, and as was mentioned by Angrit, we need this, whoever is going to be involved in this endeavor, to not just to take but also to give. It's really an act of co-creation in itself. So I'm happy to close us off. I mean, from the MLE, we heard that we need a systems approach, a systemic approach to the governance of S4P ecosystems, working with all actors, co-creating, fostering cooperation, interactions, and knowledge exchange. From the research side, this requires deep transformation to remove the barriers to policy engagement, to create capacity and better align incentives. But I could say the same from the policy side. From the policy-making side. So just a word on the MLE. The final report of the MLE was presented to you in this session, and I've been asked to inform you that the report can be found on the Policy Support Facility PSF website. So back to the European research area. I don't know how many of you are aware of what are aware of the ERA. But the European research area is really our main research and innovation policy framework to create a single market for research and innovation in Europe. So it's where we can get legitimacy and the policy mandate to do a whole number of things. And in the new ERA policy agenda that was just released, 2025 to 2027, which actually was endorsed by last week by the Council, includes a dedicated action on advancing the European science for policy ecosystem. And so it's because of this that over the next 3 years, we're going to work towards that goal while trying to find synergies also with other R&I policy priorities of the European research area. But, having a political mandate is one thing, and it's very, very important. But then if you want to make things happen, you actually need some money. So I'm very happy to say that we have mobilized funding to support these objectives by launching a dedicated wide-era call to support a more connected, capable, and visible science for policy ecosystem. And you can read all about it. We've printed these postcards for you. There's a QR code. And so please do take these home and take the time to read the call for proposals. Because hopefully you will be inspired and submit to us some very good proposals. As you know, the way in which calls for proposals work is that it's a competitive call. So we hope to receive quite a few interesting proposals that can help us meet our ambition. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe that the amount of, let's say, budget that is expected to be devoted to this will be around 2 million euros over, I think, a three-year period or 3 or 4 year period. So, by the way, the call for proposals was presented during the Wide Era Work Program Info Day that took place just last week. It was recorded and it can be watched in replay. And there you can listen in to my very good colleague Farah, who did brilliantly at explaining what the call was about. And if you have questions, you are still able to submit them to us. We have a frequently asked questions section on the funders and tenders portal, where we will be, let's say, feeding back on questions that are asked until the funding deadline is achieved. And so now what? So with the ERA action adopted and the call for proposals opened, we're ready to take on next steps. To build capacity and foster mutual learning. And we intend to do that by setting up, or rather strengthening, the Science for Policy and evidence-informed policy-making community of practice. And we're doing that in very, very close cooperation with our sister DG, the JRC. And Anne-Gret has just fed back to you what is in their pipeline. And we hope that all of this can come together under this coordination and support action. So within that context, so there's a community of practice, and then we have another ingredient in this endeavor, and that is to establish a network of national science for policy coordinators composed of representatives of member states and associated countries. So what does this mean? This means that we're looking for officials from national R&I policy authorities or institutions that are working on science for policy. And this network will ensure the alignment of R&I systems with science for policy objectives, and it will work under the ERA policy agenda to support synergies and actions that make research, of course, more impactful for policy making. The coordination and support action will support the network and ensure its dialogue with the broader S4P community. And then finally, another ingredient in this endeavor is that the grant, the coordination and support action, will support an observatory of the European science for policy landscape and its practices, which will help identify the gaps and the needs to make resources available, accessible, and showcase appropriate methods, guides, and tools to advance science for policy ecosystems. So we're very excited to keep advancing our work on this area, and we do look forward to collaborating with you on the next steps. And I thank you very much for your assistance. I hope the day has been exciting. It's not over yet, so that's why I'm handing back over to you, Jackie.
Thank you so much, Karen. Thank you. And those cards to get more information are dotted around on your seats. Thank you very much. So you might have seen something a little bit earlier when we flicked slightly fast through the slides about what happens next. And this is where I explain to you why you have funny little post-it notes on your seats. Because we're going to hear some pitches. So in the run-up to this conference, as part of the preparation, the organizers invited ideas, creative ideas to strengthen science for policy. And we're going to hear some pitches of some of those ideas that have come up. And what we'd like you to do over dinner, they will continue, they will have stands and posters downstairs, is listen to them now or go and listen to them during the reception and the dinner. And we'd like you to vote for what you think are the most effective idea. What do you think was that? And when you've decided which one you think is the most effective idea that you've heard, then go to that poster and stick it on the poster or give it to the organisers. But also the most innovative. So for the most effective idea, you use the yellow post-it note. For the most innovative idea, you use the pink one. And if enough of you votes, well, we'll see what happens and come back to you later on. But to get that process started, we thought just before we break for a lovely evening of dinner and networking and talking, that we wanted to hear some of these pitches. Now, they were able to pitch an idea as an individual or as an organisation. So I'm not going to introduce them by organisation. I'm simply going to introduce them by name, ask them to come up, do their pitch, and they can tell you, if they're representing an organisation, what that organisation is. But a big warning to those who are doing the pitches, I'm going to be really horrible now. We have asked them to do this in 1 minute each. And I'm going to be pretty strict about sticking to that 1 minute because pitchers, it is very foolish pitchers. You won't win their vote if you keep them from their drinks and their nice dinner. So let us get underway. And our first presenter, I hope, to pitch to you, Francisco Simoes. Where is Francisco? Francisco, come and join me. Make your way. There are some steps over there. Okay, Francisco. Or you can do it from there, or you can walk it, whatever you prefer. I think it's nicer in the middle here. Okay,
Moment.
Off you go.
So, hi everyone. My name is Francisco Simões. I'm the chair of the European Rural Youth Observatory, and I'm delighted to be here. And disclaimer, I'm a rural boy coming from the Azores Islands in Portugal, so far away. And I'm here because there's a consensus about rural areas. They're expected to be declining and hopeless places. But probably that's not the full story. And ERIO, the European Rural Youth Observatory, is interested in unfolding the futures of rural areas. So that is why we are developing the Future Youth Information for Rural Areas under a Cost Innovators Grant. And this toolbox is a foresight toolbox to anticipate rural future trends around young people, and at the same time, we are interested in supporting new policies for rural areas. And at the same time, we are also participating in the EU-Rural Pact as members of the coordination group, so we are working at other levels of policy advice.
Okay, Francisco,
so please
10
visit
seconds.
us.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. You can visit Francisco and find out more over the dinner. Now let me bring up Laura Valiniam. Laura? She's coming right from the back. Seem to have a colleague with you as well. There are two of you. I'm sorry, I only had one name, so you can introduce yourselves when you get on stage. Oh, I think they're going to... Are you coming round or are you leaping up? They're going to leap up. There we go. Do we have a second mic? We don't. You'll have to share it. Okay, but you have 1 minute between you, I should make it clear. Okay, away you go.
How many of you have sat through science policy workshops that are not leading anywhere? Yes.
Are you saying science policy interaction is useless?
No, but you should know that discussions between research and policymakers can be messy. That's why we need new innovative models to facilitate the interaction.
Innovative models. Why does everything need to be innovative?
Because old ways are not enough. That's why in Finland we have developed a concept called science sparring. It's policy red teaming that employs dialogue techniques.
Sparring, red teaming. Are you sure you are not just reinventing the wheel?
Well, yeah. Science sparring is not just another workshop. It's a model to create an environment of trust where researchers can openly stress test ideas that policymakers have. We know what does not work, and we have solutions.
And we challenge you to use them.
Thank you very much. Please, I introduce Laura. Your name is?
So, thank you. My name is Linda Lammensalo, and we come from the Finnish Academy of Science and Letters.
Thank you so much. That was lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, our next pitch also comes from two people. I'm delighted to welcome onto the stage Betty Evangelinu and Elena Richard. Where are they? Are they here? Yes. Doing it on your own? Okay. Over to you.
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Agnes Jaszinska. I'm from the Digital Curation Center. Is it the right one?
No. Oh. But hang on, but carry on.
Okay, sorry.
I'll find out after, don't worry. I'll find out afterwards if Betty and the other speaker are there. Off you go, you have 1 minute.
Agnes Jaszinska, Digital Curation Center in Edinburgh, but today I represent the Skills for EOSC project. So EOSC is the European Open Science Cloud, and the Skills for EOSC project is an international consortium that develops and delivers training and other resources to support open science, including science for policy. And so if you come to my poster, I can tell you more about 3 Skills for EOSC research outputs, including a learning path for evidence-based decision-making for policymakers, a Skills for EOSC workshop for researchers, and a Skills for EOSC initiative kit for competence centers. So please come talk to me. I would love to share more. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed, Agnes. So can I just check, are Betty and Elena here or not? It's the same, because I had you listed separately. Thank you for the clarification. Okay, we will now move on, and I'm delighted to welcome John O'Connor to the stage. Is John here? John. You can jump up this way if you like. There we go, sir. Over to you to pitch your idea.
Thank you very much. John O'Connor from Maynooth University in Ireland, working with colleagues on mapping Ireland's and national brokerage structures and systems back home. The pitch is we need a European approach to mapping science for policy ecosystems. Probably the most common words we've heard today is systems, ecosystems, systems thinking. It's been a lot of work led by the JRC and the mutual learning exercises on publishing national reports or profiles of ecosystems. I think we really need to look at those work carefully. I have read all those country reports. They talk about institutions, they talk about actors, they talk about connections. Some of them have maps that look like transit maps, and whatever they tell us about the systems of mapping. These are really important documents. They're used by policymakers who are responsible for shaping and developing systems. They're used by researchers, but they really are important reality definers. So we need much more critical engagement in these documents to take them forward. So towards a European approach to developing and producing maps of national science for policy systems.
Thank you very much indeed, John. And also from Ireland, delighted to welcome Mark Boyle to the stage. Mark? No? Okay. Let us move on, and I'll double check in a moment. Willie Schultz. Is Willie Schultz here? Yep, here he comes. And then after Willie, we have one more, and then it'll be time for drinks. But aren't they doing a brilliant job so far? Impossible to pitch an idea like this in 1 minute. But I hope they're giving you enough of a teaser to go and visit them later on. Over to you, sir.
Is it possible with this one?
You can do it wherever you want,
Thank you very much, because I need my hand in a second. So Willi Scholz from the Kiel Science Communication Network. It is a visual science communication research center, and I hope you come to my stand. I will now start with my pitch. So I will start like this. We all heard the sound of silence since January 20. Do we need science communication in a post-factual world? Can we still reach policy or society? Do we have the right sound to reach these target groups? We in the Kiel Science Communication Network believe yes. And our research shows that our most important sound makers is scientists themselves. Thus, training them to communicate and at the same time reinvent our way of communicating to re-reach the target groups turns the sound of silence into the sound of science. So please come to my stand if you want to hear more about the sound of science. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And our last pitch comes from two people. Please join me in welcoming Marion Bardi and Clementine Lallier to the stage. 2 pitches. 2 pitches, 1... okay, well, you hang on then. So you're doing separate pitches. Okay, you go first, and then you go second. The other way round. Okay.
So my name is Marion Bardi. I'm working at the French National Institute for Research on Agriculture, Food and Environment. And let's come back 10 years ago when I used to work at INRA, a National Institute for Agronomic Research, as a head of unit very much involved in science for policy. And I had to deal on myself with every aspect of the relationship with policymakers. And I had a dream that science for policy could be better coordinated in the institute. And well, in 2020, this dream came true when INRAE was created. That's a new institute, and also a new directorate, the Directorate for Public Policy Support. And I'm now head of this directorate. And well, what's our everyday job? Our everyday job is to facilitate the engagement of scientists in science for policy. And to achieve this, we have developed a whole range of internal services to help them in doing this. And so if you want to know more of our services and science for policy in practice, come and see me.
Thank you so much, Marion. Thank you.
I will over this.
And Clémentine.
Thank you. I'm Clémentine Lallier, also coming from INRAE.
A bit closer to the mic, if you would.
Or
you can have this one if you prefer.
It's fine. Thank you. So the big question is always, how do we translate science into actionable knowledge for decision makers? Well, at INRAE, we do so with collective scientific assessments. These analyses of the validated knowledge have helped inform public policies for over 20 years on complex societal issues. But what makes them special? Well, they're led by international experts, they're multidisciplinary, and they engage with public authorities and stakeholders to ensure both scientific rigor and societal relevance. Take the recent examples on pesticides. 44 experts work together to deliver an assessment on the impacts on pesticides, on biodiversity and ecosystem services, which is now being used to improve pesticide reduction policies. Now, I would be delighted to tell you more about this tool and its specificities, so please make sure to come see me to discuss more.
Thank you very much indeed. And we're going to squeeze one more in. Gabor Zudi, please join me on the stage and give us your pitch in 1 minute.
Yeah, sorry for taking it up as the last person. I've told to be very short. You can come to me. My name is Gabor Zudi. I'm representing the local Center for Social Innovation and the Verity Project. The Verity Project will just end. It took 3 years to find us how to foster trust in science through a better science and policy mechanism. And lots of times I heard today that people do not trust science. So I would like to say that this is not true per se, because if you check the Eurobarometer data, people do trust science. In average, 78% of the people say so. So what is the problem? People do not trust such science which they think is not aligned with societal needs, or it's influenced by policymakers and business people. And what are the supposed solutions? We also provided many recommendations that I'm happy to talk about with you. But the most important ones, I'm a bit afraid to say this at the end here, we should build bridges between science and policy, but carefully build bridges in such a way that people understand scientists act as scientists and policymakers as policymakers. The line shouldn't be blurry, and they should be engaged in such debates, and they shouldn't confuse the scientist roles with the policymaker. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Gabor. And thank you also for bringing us back to where we started this morning, because it is all about that building of bridges. I was intrigued, fascinated by what I just heard from all of them. I hope you were too. Please do visit their stands during the dinner. Keep your post-it notes to hand. And as I say, when you've visited as many as you can or want to, please give or stick on their poster the yellow poster for what you think is the most effective idea and the pink one for the most innovative idea. But let's have another round of applause for all our fantastic pictures. So that brings us to the end of the formal proceedings for today, but the night is yet but young, and it is now time to enjoy yourselves. The reception, dinner and reception will be held here, so you don't need to go anywhere. Do please very much, I hope you enjoy it very much indeed. Tomorrow morning, we start again at 9 o'clock, and we're going to start with what we're calling a storytelling talk. Somebody who's talking about their personal experience working in global science for policy with immense experience in that area. We're then going to have another round of breakouts where we're going to come back on many of the issues that we have touched on today. And then, as I say, in the final session, it's over to you to do the hard work. We're going to hear from Petra about what she's captured. Please do take some photos, have a look at what she's done so far. She will summarize for us what she's picked out from the 2 days of discussion. Then we're going to hear about the parallel sessions, briefly what you talked about. But then I really would love to hear from all of you. So think about this overnight, how you see the way forward. What has struck you out of this event, what you take away from it, where you go from here. Please keep your badges. You'll need them again tomorrow. And it only remains me to thank all our wonderful speakers today, both here in plenary and in the breakouts. Thank all of you for being here. Thank you for your questions and comments so far. Lots more to come tomorrow. Have a wonderful evening, and I'll see you bright-eyed and bushy-tailed tomorrow morning. Thank you.